Hello everybody, this is Vicky. If you've just stumbled across this video on YouTube, this is the Premature Menopause project, and this is a blog I very recently started up to help people with a premature menopause diagnosis to deal with some of the issues that come up for you along the way. I'm aware there's not very much out there in the world for us, and I'm somebody with that diagnosis myself. So last time my first video was really telling you more or less just about my journey, about some of the kind of highs and lows and what's happened so far of the first kind of 18 months worth of having the diagnosis. I just wanted to say a really huge thank you to everybody that took the time to watch the video, to comment. I got some really good feedback from some of the people that watched it, saying that it really helped them, that it was a useful resource to have out there. I have had a couple of you say that you've got kind of similar blogs actually, so I really apologise that I haven't been able to check them out yet, but I will do, because I feel really passionate about this. I'm really glad that there are other people who are talking about this same subject, and that was my hope, that there would be more of a community around it. So I'm really excited to see what you have to say, and I'm sure your blogs are equally as beneficial to anybody with the diagnosis, and I'm sure I'll be learning a lot from you as well. So today, if I keep looking to the side, it's because I always make notes when I make YouTube videos, because I always forget about things that I wish I'd have said. Please forgive the appearance today. I haven't bothered with makeup or anything like that. So let's get going. So I guess today, I kind of wanted to try and do these videos in some kind of logical order, but it's going to be quite difficult because things jump around a bit. But my idea for this video really was to talk about kind of the aftermath, the kind of aftershock of what happens when you get your diagnosis. And some of, what I want to reiterate again, and I'll probably say this at the intro to every video, is firstly, please remember I'm not a medical professional. I'm not qualified to give medical advice. Please don't take my advice in that way. These are just kind of opinions of somebody that has been through the process themselves, and what works for me may not work for you. You're an individual with your own individual issues connected to your diagnosis, so it's by no means meant as a way of telling you what you should be doing. It's just kind of some helpful suggestions if they work for you and fit into your life. And secondly, unfortunately, it has to be with this negative slant on things, but a lot of the things I'll be talking about are reflecting back on my experience and what I wish had have been the case but wasn't. I've learned quite a lot about premature menopause, how it's affected me, things that I think could help other people, through thinking about what went wrong for me, what help didn't I get, what support didn't I get, what mistakes did I make with things that I think now, maybe I could have done that differently. But a really key message I want to kind of put out there now is, I don't think you should try and police your reaction too much to this. I don't think when you're going through a really emotionally traumatic subject such as this, that you should be beating yourself up about, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that, I shouldn't have told these people, I should have told these people. I don't think it's about that. I'm only speaking with hindsight about some things that maybe if they had been in place for me, would have made things a little bit easier along the way. And I'm just hoping that by watching a video where someone is suggesting some of those things to you, you'll be able to come to your own conclusions about what might help before things get too far down the line for me, where I felt that it was a bit too late with things. So a lot of what I'll be talking about will be based on experiences that I have or haven't had, depending on how you look at it. So I guess premature menopause is a very, very emotionally difficult piece of news to take in, and it's more than just a piece of news. It has ripple effects across your whole life, I think. I don't think that's any exaggeration. And I guess where that starts, your journey I don't think starts with your diagnosis. I think for many of us it actually starts when you look back at some of the things that are now explained better by knowing what was going on. But to a certain extent it starts when you get your diagnosis, because that's your first confirmation that something you may have been worried about is true. one of the things I found really difficult is that something that I had probably never really given a lot of attention in my mind, because obviously I didn't think it was ever going to really happen to me, as you do, but some kind of fleeting thoughts that I'd had about my fertility actually became a reality. And it's that kind of feeling of, oh, something that I've always felt really sorry for other people when it's happened to them, but relieved that it hasn't ever happened to me, has actually happened to me. And what do I do now? How do I deal with this? How do I move forward? It's really difficult. I mean, I want to make sure I'm not reducing the whole experience to the fertility issue, but the reason why I'm talking about it so much, and I really hope this isn't kind of making it difficult for anybody to watch, but the reason why I'm talking about it so much is because I know firsthand, not just for myself, but for many people that I've interacted with on forums and things, is that the fertility issue is a massive issue, which is connected to the diagnosis, which needs a lot of support. So there isn't really any getting around in these videos that is going to be a major theme of what we'll be talking about, but I don't want that to put people off accessing this blog if firstly that's not a concern for you, or secondly that's not your main priority, because actually there's a lot of things that we'll be talking about which will be relevant to the whole thing. So it's really big news, and it's something, it kind of feels like a bit of a bomb goes off in your life, and I think what I've learned is that the reaction that you have when you first find out the news is not always the reaction longer term. Things change, the way you think about things change, and sometimes you feel that you've dealt with things, but actually you realise that you haven't yet. So as I said, it is a very emotionally traumatic thing to go through, and I think we want to spend a lot of this video talking about the emotional issues of what happens. But because I know that there are some practicalities involved, I thought it would be helpful to talk about those first. Firstly, because obviously they are practicalities, they're not as kind of involved as the emotional side of things, but they are important, and I wanted to address them. So it's not done in a cold or clinical way, but it's just I'm starting from that point of view, because I think those are the things that perhaps need to be addressed first as well. So when we're thinking about, you might have absolute confirmation of your diagnosis by a number of different ways, but I would imagine that for many of you, you'd be similar to me in that your GP was dealing with some initial concerns, but you were referred to a consultant at a hospital who probably did the job, maybe after quite a few blood tests and other tests, of actually delivering the confirmed diagnosis to you. So I kind of will be talking on an assumption that we're talking about that kind of scenario, but I think all of the points are kind of fairly similar and should apply to anybody's situation, really. So one of the things, obviously, we will talk a lot about the emotional side, but obviously what one of the impacts on the practical side of things is that when you're hearing a piece of news that's so devastating, you're clearly, obviously, not going to be in the right headspace to take all of the information in that you probably need to about what you've been told. I know I definitely had a bit of a blank when I look back on my first appointment. I obviously zone in on certain parts that I can remember, but I really don't remember that much about what they told me and how they explained things to me. So it's kind of useful to put some things in place which, when you're feeling in a better mindset or a different mindset, to be able to tackle some of the information, that you don't lose that, and that actually there are ways of getting that back and kind of understanding what you're dealing with. So on a practical level, the first thing I would suggest is, and this is good practice for any hospital, but I will say with quite a cynical look on my face, this is best practice with a hospital. We should definitely receive some kind of formal written confirmation of the appointment you have, especially at hospitals. It's not always the case with GPs, but certainly with hospitals, when you go to see a consultant, they're supposed to write some notes up. I think it's within about 48 hours, but I'm probably wrong there, about what they discussed with you, what the outcome was, and any kind of resulting actions that they'll be taking, such as referrals. If you don't receive that within, I would say, a couple of weeks of your appointment, realistically, then definitely don't be afraid to contact the hospital and say that you haven't received anything. The other thing is that I think there's a huge issue with information like that being actually accessible. You look at a piece of paper and you have no idea, you know, I certainly had no idea of what all of these figures and you know, different jargon terms mean. I think that a good consultant should be providing you with user-friendly information which is made clear to you what that actually means. But I know in practice quite often you get an NHS headed letter and all it really is almost like their letter to your GP with you copied in, rather than a letter to you, the person that's dealing with the issue. So anything you can get in writing, I mean, even worst comes to the worst, if it is quite jargonistic, quite clinical, at least you have something on paper. I mean, I'm not a massive advocate of always looking up medical things online, because I think there's an awful lot of inaccurate information on there. But if there is something kind of quite simple, such as FSH, I didn't have a clue what FSH hormone was, what it stood for. It's follicle stimulating hormone, by the way, but still get my head around it. You can at least Google that. You can have a look at what that actually means, and that was the part that helped me to understand, okay, well, that's how that's affected this part of my body. So that's a kind of exercise with caution kind of thing, but the bottom line is get some kind of confirmation in writing, and don't be afraid to chase on that if you haven't received it, because hospitals are notoriously bad for the admin side of things and not getting information out to patients. One of the things that actually was dealt with very well in my appointment that I remember, I think I mentioned in my last video that the woman that I saw, the female consultant that I saw, was actually probably the best person that I saw, was the person that delivered the original diagnosis to me. One of the things that she suggested to me was that because it was such a huge piece of news to kind of take in and absorb, that it probably wouldn't be a good idea to make any decisions there and then that day about treatment and going forward. And also she sort of realised that I might have questions that I can't think of on the spot that day. I think that's really realistic. I don't think most people, you know, it might be even more of a shock to you than it was to me, your diagnosis, because I had already had some inkling that something might be along those lines from my GP test results. So I would recommend, if your consultant doesn't recommend it themselves, or they are trying to rush you into decisions in the initial appointment, I really would stop them there. Again, obviously, if you've already had your first appointment, that's fine. You can go back and ask for this again. You know, book another appointment for a few weeks' time. It should be, again, it should be best practice. I mean, she gave me an appointment for 2-3 weeks' time. She asked me to think of some questions that I might have, let the news sink in, and, you know, explain that we would talk about things like HRT medication and some of the other decisions then when I've had a chance to kind of really think about things. I would argue that, you know, a few weeks' time isn't necessarily, you know, enough time to really decide what's right for you, because to a certain extent HRT is about experimenting and trial and error, but it at least gives you a little bit of time to kind of get your headspace into, okay, well, what do I think I might want to explore here? And you may find that having gone away, absorbed the news, thought about some of the symptoms that you've been experiencing, it may give you some ideas and some prompts for things that you might want to ask the doctor. One of the things I'd say as well, kind of on a similar frame, is don't let people rush you into making decisions. I think understandably there is a slight sense of urgency when doctors talk to you about getting on HRT, because most of us have kind of researched some of the risks that are attached to premature menopause in terms of bone density, in terms of womb health. And that's why they tend to be quite keen to get you into HRT or to decide on a course of action quite quickly. But I believe some of that is just a process thing where they don't really have the time to give people the space they really need to make those decisions. Again, put it out there, I'm not a medical practitioner, but I would be extremely surprised if your body can't afford to take a few weeks to think about something like that, because my experience and all the knowledge that I've kind of accrued, you know, it's not a really immediate effect with premature menopause. Some of these health risks are kind of more gradual, and that there's always time to decide what's right for you. So there are I think one of the things people often say is that they didn't really feel they had any choice with what happened then on. They were given this diagnosis, they were told, may or may not have been told really what that meant. And then the expectation was that they got started on the medication the GP decided for them. So I just wanted, as an advocate, to kind of remind you that you do have choices. You have choices in quite a number of areas, actually, and please don't allow anybody to make you feel otherwise. If it helps to have an advocate, to have somebody else with you, it might be a partner, a friend, a parent, another family member who can come into future appointments with you to make sure that from an objective point of view you're not being kind of pushed into a direction. That might be helpful for you. So the choices you have, first of all, at a very basic level, you do actually have a choice whether you would like to go on to HRT or not. The kind of general perception is, I think, and the general kind of accepted science at the moment is that it's incredibly strongly recommended that people with premature menopause go on some kind of HRT medication, because you're missing these hormones that you should be present in your body, because of the potential risk to your womb health, to your bone density, to all sorts of things. It is generally recommended. And from what I know, the vast majority of people do end up on some form of HRT. But I also think it's also important to remember that actually that is a choice, and there are people out there who have chosen not to take HRT because of their stance on medication, their own bodies, what they feel would be beneficial for them. So I'm not here to kind of push people into any decisions, but that's exactly what I'm saying. Don't be pushed into a decision, and remember that actually HRT is a choice. It's not a necessity. Well, I want to kind of rephrase it. It is a necessity in terms of finding a solution that works for you. But although there is some very strong medical evidence that HRT is crucial for people with premature menopause, obviously your body is your own. We are all free to make choices about what we want to put into our bodies, and really nobody can force you to do that. So if you don't feel it's right for you, or you don't feel you have enough knowledge yet to get started on HRT, that is a choice that you have, and you will, if you do it takes some digging, but if you go online, there are some quite helpful resources that I found from time to time about people talking about their experience of not taking HRT, some of the benefits, some of the risks, some of the upsides, downsides of that, and that might help you to make a decision as to whether or not that's what you'd like to do. You also have a choice then of, okay, so say that you are deciding to go the HRT route, which will probably be the majority of you. There's a really actually quite wide array of HRT available to you. I've learned that the hard way, because I've had quite a lot of trouble with finding the right HRT dosage and kind of method for me. So I've tried, I haven't tried loads and loads, but I've tried 4 or 5 different things, and I've kind of read up a bit. So there's all sorts of things from so there's obviously tablets. The tablets will basically be a mixture of hormones of, I can never say this, progesterone and estrogen, and they, from what I understand, they are either natural or synthetic hormones. So they will either be natural hormones, by which they mean hormones derived from kind of plants, animals, which again is another choice. There's plant-based hormones, there's equine-based, so horse, sounds very odd to say that, but some HRTs I've had have been kind of equine HRTs, which is where they've taken those hormones from a horse or something. I don't really understand how that works. It sounds a bit strange, but that's a choice that you have. There's natural ones. Some people prefer plants, some people because of some of the effects of the side effects on them. There's also what they call synthetic HRTs, which I can only imagine are kind of laboratory simulated hormones as well. I think, I might be wrong, I think most HRTs tend to be synthetic, but don't take my word for that because I'm not an expert, I might be wrong there. So you have a choice about that. You also have a choice about so you have a form of what method. So you do have tablets. There are also things like creams and pessaries. So generally speaking, I don't think this would be the only form of HRT you would take, because it's usually designed to deal with things like vaginal dryness. But you can get vaginal pessaries, vaginal creams that have a certain amount of HRT in. One of the sometimes embarrassing and sometimes really uncomfortable and quite painful symptoms with premature menopause is that too much information time, you lose the amount of natural lubrication that you have down there, and it can be incredibly painful. It can make things like sex very painful. It can also just, I find in general, be very uncomfortable day to day, because it shouldn't be that way. So vaginal pessaries and creams can help bring some moisture back to that area to bring a balance back, and can also deliver some of the hormones. You might want to have a look and see if there's any HRTs that in cream form that actually are the full dosage. When it was explained to me by a doctor, they explained to me that usually it's kind of an additional thing you would give somebody if they're still experiencing a particular problem with dryness, but it might be that there is HRT out there purely in the form of creams. So we've done tablets, we've done creams, patches. I'm currently on a patch at the moment. Patches in general have more or less worked for me. I think patches are probably the way I'm going to go with mine, kind of longer term. They tend to be kind of clear, see-through patches that you, I don't know why I'm pointing to my arm, because actually it wouldn't be your arm that you put them on. You generally put them on your thighs or on your bottom, and that absorbs HRT through the skin. And I'm sure there are other things. There may even be implants and things. I'm not really sure how it works, but I imagine there may be some things available which I haven't thought of, and it might make a difference whether you're going private, NHS, whether you're in the UK or USA. I think my main choices were given to me were tablets or patches, but again, there's a possibility that there's a lot more out there. So you have that choice. And then let's say that you're not sure about the HRT thing. People do talk about alternative medicine, like Chinese medicine or alternative therapies. I don't really want to get into a debate, particularly on here, as to whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing. One of the things I'm really conscious of with issues such as premature menopause and fertility is that people are incredibly opinionated. I mean, quite rightly, people are very passionate about their experience, but I don't want people to feel threatened for their choices or feel that they can't be free to comment in this blog about what's worked for them. So I do know that some people do have quite strong opinions about whether it's safe or okay to do alternative therapies, but I just want to put it out there that it is a choice that you have. It's an option that you have, and again, there will be resources online and people you can talk to online or in person, and your doctor may even know some information about alternative therapies. So there are choices that you have there, and just remember that it's okay to change your mind. I've changed my mind with my HRT 3, 4, 5 times. It's part of what doctors and medical professionals expect you to do, because it's a very exact science trying to get your hormones right. So it's completely normal that it would take you some time to find the right fit for you, but definitely if you need to take a couple of weeks to work that out, I think that's fair enough. So one of the other practical things as well is making sure that it sounds very basic, but being given the information that you actually need to make informed decisions about your medication, about your treatment, and just to feel as if you understand what's going on for you. Knowledge is power, as they say. If you have the right knowledge in place about what's going on in your body, you're in a better position to make choices about what will be helpful for you. So that will be things like literature on HRT. I wasn't given any HRT literature. I wasn't given a leaflet or anything to read to help me to understand. I had a little bit of information verbally from the doctor, but I wish I'd have read up a bit more about it. And these are all things you can ask for after the initial appointment. Don't feel that just because you missed out on asking for something that you're not entitled to. You are. Go back, call them, talk to them, tell them that you need some stuff to be sent through to you. And as I say, Daisy Network can help you with this as well. So things like the types of HRT, any side effects that you can expect to experience. I'd really emphasise that one. I don't want to scare people off because it's not horrendous, but I've had some pretty crappy side effects from different types of HRT, and to a certain extent we can't predict how specific types of medication will affect particular individuals, but there are certain types of HRT that are more renowned for certain side effects than others, so it's really important that they tell you some of the side effects you can realistically expect with the medication choices that you have. So trying to read my writing on my notebook. The risk-benefit ratio, so we've spoken about that choice to go on HRT, not go on HRT, and what's helpful or not helpful about that. You need to have some idea of the pros and cons of the choice that you're making. So are the risks of this type of medication going to outweigh the benefits, or vice versa? Luckily, most people will say that the HRT they've taken, although they have some side effects and they may have had to go to the doctor about those things, the benefit it provided them with was fantastic. And I can categorically say that however the ups and downs I've had with my HRT, if I wasn't on HRT, I'm sure things would be a million times worse for me. So it's just about finding the right fit, really. Also things like how to take the medication. Patches can be a little bit confusing, and especially if you're like me, what I do now, I take a patch and tablet combination, so getting kind of clear instructions about that can be really helpful. And also how long you should give the HRT before deciding whether it's right for you. So it reminds me a little bit of what people say about antidepressants. So with any antidepressant medication, as an example, what often happens is that people will give up on medication at a certain point because they think it's not working. And actually quite a lot of medications, including HRT, do take a good settling in period for you to really understand the real nature of how they're working for you. I did have a very positive experience with the first HRT that I tried. It kind of really, even within a few days, seemed to really help me. But what can sometimes happen, which I've had before, is that kind of a couple of months in, you start having some side effects that are problematic that you weren't having before. And it can also be the other way around. You might be struggling with some issues, and then actually, if you gave it 2-3 months, those settle down and you realise that actually it is working. But you may not know. I don't think, why would we know, necessarily. You may not know what that kind of settling in period tends to be. So talk to your doctor about, how long should I give this medication before I decide whether it's working? How much of a chance should I give it? If you want a bit of kind of peer advice from me, again, not medically trained, but what I would say is my experience has generally been that I think you can, if I look back at the different forms of HRT I've tried and when I knew they weren't working for me, I think I knew within about 3 months. I think it's probably a good idea to give it more than one kind of, some HRTs will give you a bleed and some won't, but if you're in your 20s, the chances are you'll have been prescribed something that does give you a bleed, because that's part of what they're trying to achieve with the HRT. So obviously HRT will have an effect on a kind of simulated period that you'll have, and as we know, as women, periods can be very strange things. They can kind of be very different, month to month. So I would say don't necessarily judge it on your first period or breakthrough bleed that you have. Maybe give it 2 or 3 breakthrough bleeds. See what the side effects were around the time before you bled, during the time that you were bleeding, to see a bit like what your PMT was with it, whether there are any symptoms that affected it. I've used that as a helpful gauge for me, and it seems to have worked. When I've had 3 cycles of the medication, I'm generally in a better place to understand whether it works. Definitely have learned not to take it on the first month, because things can be very different from how they feel in the first month, because your body's actually at that stage just getting used to new chemicals and new hormones and stuff, so it's not always very telling. Some people will tell you from day one they're absolutely fine with the HRT and it kind of continued quite consistently, but my own experience has been that actually the first month doesn't really tell you all that you need to know. But that's something to find out from your doctor. They'll know much more than I will. Also, they should be giving you literature on infertility, so how that Now, I wouldn't necessarily expect them to, I would love in an ideal world for this to be the case, but I wouldn't necessarily expect them to have literature specifically on premature menopause and infertility. But what they should be giving you is some idea of what infertility treatment options there are, some kind of support literature really about that, because that's a major part of what your diagnosis will be. I remember thinking, oh, nobody gave me that, and one of the reasons was that premature menopause and POF diagnosis and stuff, generally, I mean, in the UK, I think you'll probably see what's called an endocrinology team, which is a team that specialises in hormonal disorders, and that includes things like diabetes and things like that. And because the department in the Royal Free Hospital where I go are connected to the Kidney and Neurology Centre, and I find that their department is very, very centred around that, and all of the literature that I see and any posters and any leaflets is about that. I'm not sure if they have got another area where they put that literature for infertility or menopausal or hormonal disorders, but I've never actually seen or been offered anything from them, and I'm sure that can't be right. And actually, when I looked it up afterwards, I did realise that again it was best practice that they give you that. So yeah, so if you, and that's if you want it, but it will, it's something to bear in mind. Where can I find out this information about my infertility options as well? Explanation, they should be giving you an explanation of any tests you've had, so why you had the test, what led them to test you in that way, what the breakdown of the results really mean. Now, generally speaking, because probably you won't be having hospital appointments every couple of weeks, you'll probably be having them kind of months apart, and it will come to a point like it did with me, where they will kind of more or less transfer your care over to your GP, but you'll have kind of check-in appointments at the hospital. So this is where your GP comes in mostly, is explaining to you what those tests were actually done for, what the results are telling them, and explaining any jargon. I don't know about you, but I had this NHS letter posted through my door, same thing as I said earlier. It was obviously meant for my GP rather than me. Lots of numbers, lots of things I didn't really understand, and it can be quite alarming. So to have somebody demystify that by explaining it can be really, really helpful. And what would have been really good, and I have had this from some people and not from others, is getting a contact from the hospital or the GP, someone that you can contact should you have any questions that you think of at a later date. This is only something that's happened recently, and I think it's very dependent on the person that you actually see, but recently I saw somebody at Royal Free who gave me a business card with an email address that I could contact if I had any queries, and I wish somebody had done that a year and a half ago, because actually it's so frustrating sometimes trying to get through to the right person on switchboards and calling secretaries, and trying to do that around full-time work is just crazy. So the earlier you can get hold of some kind of contact details of somebody could be really helpful for you. I kind of mentioned about infertility literature, but this might be something that is just not within, regardless of whether you do or don't want children, this might be something that is very overwhelming for you at this point and not really something you want to get into, and that's absolutely fine. But if the infertility thing is a major thing playing on your mind, it might help you to just get some very low-level basic information about the hospital that you're seeing and where they would be referring you to if you decide to have infertility treatment. The reason I'm saying this is, for somebody, I mean, I'll talk about my journey with the whole infertility thing kind of at other times, but for someone like me, I wasn't actively trying for children at the time that I found out, but there will be others of you who were, and this diagnosis might have been given to you as an explanation for why you're having problems. So for you guys, it will be really helpful to know, okay, so for the hospital that I'm seeing now, knowing I have this diagnosis, where would they be referring me to, and how quickly will that be? What can I expect? What are my treatment options? So finding that stuff out as soon as you are ready to and able to hear that information can be really good. They should be offering you counselling. I'm not exaggerating, I think maybe 2 people I've spoken to were actually offered counselling by the hospital, which to me is terrible. But you should be offered some kind of therapeutic support for free of charge on the NHS, at least if you're in the UK. Sorry, I keep forgetting that people watching this might be in other countries, but in the UK, obviously I'm talking about the NHS. So, they should provide you with some details of where you can get help and support in a kind of, online help can be really, really good, but also in the real world, so to speak, where you could practically go into, is there a hospital nearby that does some sort of a kind of open group? Is there counsellors that they can refer you on to? Is there anything they can do to kind of help you with the cost of that as well? It will possibly depend on your circumstances, but it's pretty common that they need to do a bone scan because of, as I said, there is an issue with a lack of estrogen and how that can affect bone density and bone health. So one of the first things they did with me was refer me for a bone scan to see to what extent my bones have been affected so far by the lack of hormones. Without putting too fine a point on it, that is actually quite an important part of the process. So if you haven't been referred for that, it might be that that's because it's not necessary or suitable in your situation. But even if you're not sure, ask your doctor, why haven't I been referred, and if I do need to, can that be arranged as soon as possible? My experience was that was pretty good. I had a bone scan probably within a month or so of my initial hospital appointment, and I got the results quite quickly, and they quite quickly put me on some calcium tablets and vitamin D tablets as well, vitamin D or vitamin B, I can't remember, alongside my HRT. So it just means that if there is any issues with your bone health at all, they can start tackling that at the earliest opportunity. It might be, one thing that occurred to me is that if you have other, I'm quite lucky in that I don't really have any other medical complaints or medical issues before this thing came along. So I didn't really need to worry about things like how that might affect other diagnoses I have, but you might be somebody with other health issues or other medication that you take. So obviously having an understanding of how that might interact with your premature menopause, any decisions you might need to take about other medication that you're using might be something to bear in mind. And I guess, what you can expect next, what are they expecting as the next steps. So you should have a rough idea of how frequently you'll be seeing somebody at the hospital. So they should tell you something like, we'll be seeing each other once a month, or you're going to have this appointment and then we'll talk to a GP. Who you'll be seeing, I mean, I think it's, and I actually do understand why. I mean, in an ideal world, we'd all see the same consultant every single time, but obviously that's not always possible. In my experience, I don't think you do usually see the same person, but I'm imagining that if you really requested that be the case, that there's something that they could do. But it might be worth asking, who will I be seeing, what level are they? I mean, one thing I wish I'd have asked was what kind of job role was the person that I was seeing, because some people referred to as consultants, there were some people called professors, which I didn't really know what that meant in relation to what advice they'd be giving me. Sometimes you're whipped into a room and just get your blood pressure taken and your weight taken. You don't really know who's doing that, but it's probably a nurse. So it's good to kind of get a sense of who you're talking to. So that's the practical stuff that I think might be helpful. It's a lot to take in, and as with anything in this video, this isn't about, for many of you, you'll already have had that first appointment. You might be like me, further down the road. You can't go back and change how things were in your first appointment, but these are all suggestions that once you think of them and are aware of them, might be something you want to go back and arrange and sort out at a later date. So it's never too late to go back and say, I wasn't offered this at my initial appointment, is this something I can now arrange? So let's talk about, I guess, what can be really pressing for a lot of us, which is the emotional side of things. I can't read my writing, 1 second. Yeah, so I think it was kind of just, I had a note just to kind of reiterate what I was saying earlier, which is don't berate yourself for the reaction you have. you can't really be held to accountable for how crazy or upset or difficult you were, or how you didn't do all of the things that you should have done, when you first found out about your diagnosis. No one can expect that of you. It's really, really difficult, and none of these things that are involved in your long-term kind of treatment and dealing with this issue are going to be really, really easy. Life isn't like, perfection. We don't deal with things perfectly all the time. And it's okay to have made a mistake or to regret a way that you dealt with it, but don't beat yourself up about it. It's hard stuff, and you can only do the best you can, and you will always do the best you can in the situation you found yourself in. So one of the things I guess I'd say is that I think that I've spoken about this a couple of times, but I think there is an instant and a delayed reaction to your diagnosis. I think you can feel a lot of things when you're first told. You can feel shock, anger, disbelief, incredibly upset. And those are all real reactions to things. It's that kind of reaction to something, instant trauma, but you will also have a more delayed reaction, where I found that you kind of will remember, or things will kind of be prompted in your mind that you hadn't kind of necessarily thought of before, but are now becoming an issue for you. It's a real kind of journey, and it takes a really long time to get to any point of, I would argue that you don't get to a complete closure, but you will eventually get to a point where day-to-day life becomes a little bit more manageable. But in that meantime, it will feel really difficult, and you may find, like me, that the longer down the road you are, so sort of I've recently had what I would call more of a kind of breakdown around it, kind of a year on from the original diagnosis, because I had a bit more time to kind of really absorb what was going on. So be aware, I guess, that things will change, the way you feel about things will change, and that might be more positive, more negative, but that's okay, and that's all part of what what we all go through, really. Think about, I guess, the person that you bring with you to appointments. So when you first found out, you may have been completely on your own. You may have had somebody with you at the time. You can't go back and change the person that you happen to have with you when you found out, or anything like that, but you can think about whether there's someone that you would want with you again the next time, whether you change anything. So for me, my partner came with me, but I don't think he came into the room. So I probably would change that I would have him in the room at future appointments, because I think it's something that affects us as a couple, and I find that I kind of don't always remember everything that I'm told in appointments, so it's good to have somebody with me. Think about who might be the most suitable person, and how, I guess, the people that we surround ourselves with during times like this can make all the difference as to how you feel about things, and I've learnt some really valuable lessons. But it's just something, something to think about, is the person that you feel the most comfortable with coming to support you. People are different. I mean, I do know people that would actually rather go on their own, and they actually like the space of not having anybody with them, so they can absorb the information. Sometimes I feel like that. Other times I wish that I've gone to a lot of appointments on my own and later wished that I had somebody with me. It might be a partner or a friend or a family member, or just somebody objective that you might want to bring with you to help you absorb some of that news, and somebody that was there at the time. Returning to work is quite a big emotional thing. Something I regret was that I wish I'd have had more time, actually any time off work for it. I remember finding out the news, and sorry, I thought somebody was coming to our house then, that was weird. I remember finding out the news, and I had to go straight back to work that afternoon. And I don't know, I mean, I should have kind of maybe preempted that it was going to be a difficult one for me, but thinking about it now, I mean, my manager was very supportive at the time. I had a really close relationship with my previous manager, and he offered me the opportunity to go home for the day, and it wasn't through lack of support. He's incredibly supportive, and I even remember him saying something to me, which was, if you just wake up one morning this week and you don't feel like coming in, don't come in. Just send me a text, tell me that you're not coming in, and that will be fine. Me being me and feeling awkward about that, I didn't, and I kind of sometimes think that that might have been a good idea, but people will be different. I mean, I think if it helps you to be out and about and doing stuff, then by all means, but it might be for you. I mean, I think at the time I sort of was still absorbing how big a piece of news it was, so I didn't necessarily think of it the same way as other things where I thought, okay, I'm unwell, I need to stay home from work, I need to have a couple of weeks off to absorb this. And actually you would be completely within your rights to say, the same as somebody that might be suffering from depression or anxiety, which are two things you might be experiencing as a result of this. It's a completely valid, acceptable reason to ask your HR department or work to have some time off because of a hard personal circumstance, which it is. It can be really difficult to approach people and talk to people at work about something that is not really something you want everybody knowing, and also it's very new. But if you do feel up to it, asking for a little bit of time off work, even if it's just a few days, might be beneficial. And you probably don't need to tell them all of the details if you don't want to. It might be that you just tell them that you've had some really bad news, medical news. They probably will need to know some information to be able to authorise the leave. And you'll know more about your workplace than I do, but I think most workplaces would understand that that's a difficult time and wouldn't begrudge you at least a few days off to kind of just get back in. It's very hard to go back to work and act as normal when all of that stuff is going on. If you're not ready for counselling, or if counselling isn't something that you think would be helpful for you because of your own beliefs or because of experiences you've had before, then it can be good to think about what might help. So it could be something very small for you. So for you, it could be things like, okay, well, I don't want to go to counselling, but I do want to try and make contact with one other person that's gone through this themselves. It might be something bigger like, okay, I don't want to go to counselling, but actually I need to take some time off work. So thinking about kind of putting some support in place for yourself. It's very hard to think that objectively when it's you. So when it's you, you're not really in the mindset to think, okay, well, what do I need? And it might be that other people need to kind of help you with this. But just kind of being kind to yourself and thinking about, is there anything that might make me feel better? And you can judge that on other things that have happened in your life, where things that you found helpful, things that kind of benefited you. Just trying to find something that could be put in place in the here and now if you're not ready for longer term things like therapy, but something fairly immediate that you could put into place to help support you. I think, I always say this, be kind to yourself, but one of the really valuable pieces of kind of advice that my counsellor said to me is, it's a time to kind of nurture yourself. I know that sounds very fluffy and some people don't really like that kind of phrasing, but it really is, take time to do things that you enjoy, to do hobbies, interests. It might be taking time to go out for a walk every now and again. It might be something simple like when you're at work, taking some time away from your desk. Building in some me time can really, really help, because it's so easy, and I found this, it's so easy to have the diagnosis and try and get on with the rest of your life as if everything's normal. And actually it's not normal. You're going through something really difficult, and just having a little bit more space around you so that you have the chance to kind of do things that are going to make you feel better. This might sound weird, but as you know, I have another cross stitch blog, and I'm really, really into my cross stitch and sewing, and cross stitch is something that has kind of really, I find, very therapeutic, very calming, and for me that was a tool that I used quite well to kind of help lift my mood sometimes, or to at least kind of put me on a bit more of an even keel with stuff. So it might be worth thinking about, is there anything that you can do that you enjoy that will kind of either help take your mind off it as a positive distraction, or allow you to process it if that's what you need, or just something to kind of give you a little bit of positivity at a time when you don't feel particularly positive. Just kind of checking in with your partner can be helpful. This is, I guess, obviously only applicable if you're in a relationship, but if you are in a relationship and you receive this news, one of the things I've learned is that it's very hard when you're going through it yourself, but obviously it's something that will affect your partner, and it may not seem like it's affecting them, but it will be in their own way. I wouldn't go so far as to say you need to be fully there and supporting them at the same time, because you've got your own pain, you've got your own hurt, and that's going to probably take precedence for you quite rightly for a while. But I guess if there's a small way that you can kind of remember that news has impacted somebody else, especially if you're trying for, you might be trying for children, and this diagnosis has had an effect on both of you in terms of, what your options are. So make sure you kind of check in with that other person, and it might help you feel better as well. It might make you feel less alone too. I think when you're in a relationship, there can sometimes be, and really bad things happen. It's like anything, there can be a tendency to kind of split off and isolate yourself from everybody. And usually the people that suffer are the people that are closest to us. But remember that those are often the people that are going to be the most helpful to you in getting through this. So checking in with them regularly. And if you're not with a partner, is there somebody else that you can talk to? We're coming back to the thing about, is there something immediate you can do? Is there somebody you can talk to about this? Which means that you aren't on your own, someone you can pick up the phone to, or maybe the other person apart from your partner who was there with you at the time that you received the diagnosis. Telling people is probably an issue in itself, which I'm going to cover in another video, but to touch on it briefly, the only thing I can say to you is do what you feel is right for you. I don't think it's appropriate or okay to tell someone else how to deal with their own devastating news. If you feel angry and upset and you want to tell the world because you want to be open and you want to be honest about what's going on, that's completely your choice. Also, it's your choice if you'd prefer not to tell anybody and you'd like to keep it to yourself. There are some lots of considerations about telling people and who is the right people to tell or the wrong people to tell for you. But that's something that, try and consider it in light of what's going to be helpful for you, and certainly don't pressure yourself to tell anybody that you're not ready to. It's actually quite a major decision in the whole thing, and something that I don't think anybody gets quite right. You'll live and you'll learn in terms of times you wish you'd have told somebody and times you wish you hadn't. You might not be, if you're very early on, in the right situation to kind of really decide what you want to do about that. So I guess if in doubt, don't tell them. But definitely, that's something to consider, and actually who you tell and how you tell them can make a really big difference to how good you feel or how positive you feel and how supported you feel as well. One thing that really was quite helpful for me, I didn't completely have this person the whole time because they were very busy themselves, but there's something about appointing kind of a special person, and actually even if you're in a relationship, it might be helpful to have this person as somebody kind of different, someone a little bit more objective, but someone who's a friend or family member. I call them an ally, or an advocate, someone who knows someone who you've chosen to tell your diagnosis to. So it has to be somebody that you trust and you have a really positive relationship with. But someone who you feel could help you cope in the early days when you found out. Many of us know that there are a myriad, which we'll talk about, but a myriad of different social situations where you feel incredibly uncomfortable because either people know that something was up and they want to ask you questions about it. It might just be that pushy thing of relatives talking about when you're having babies, and that comes at a really awful time when you've just found out, and it kind of really, really sort of steps on the nerve for you. So it can be really helpful to have somebody that, helps you deal with the news, someone to deflect questions for you in social situations, someone that knows when, it's the cue to change the subject, or someone that might be able to kind of just generally check in with you on a kind of weekly basis, daily basis, sending a quick text to you to sort of say, how are you doing? For me, that was one of my cousins. She kind of is, actually we used to be really, really close as children, and we're both so busy now we don't see an awful lot of each other, but she sort of, I remember telling her over the phone, and she was really good because I found myself in a lot of family situations around that time, and she was kind of there as a bit of a kind of an ally with me, and she said, you know, I'll be that person, you know, if anybody asks anything or makes any insensitive comments or anything like that, I'll be that person for you. And that was a really nice gesture, and I'm sure if you've got a really close friend or someone that you trust, they would be more than happy to do that for you. And they may also be they probably need to be somebody that won't be too overbearing with you, that won't kind of tell you how or what to deal with things, but someone that you think could be kind of there as a bit of a support. Sorry, looking at my notes. And I think kind of having time alone can sometimes be helpful, and sometimes it's helpful to be around other people. So this might depend a little bit on whether you're naturally an introvert or an extrovert. So I'm naturally an introvert, and although I have lots of friends and I'm very sociable with my friends, I actually would have, you know, the things that helped me was having a bit of time on my own actually. There were points when I was kind of wallowing, and it would probably have been better that I was around other people who might have been able to pick me up a bit. But for the most part, for me, what helped is kind of carving out some time on my own, where I didn't feel obligated to be sociable, put on a front, be happy, you know, and that worked for me. But for you, it might be about actually kind of arranging some things to do with friends, you know, or reconnecting with people you haven't spoken to for a while, just to kind of feel like you've got kind of some stuff going on. I think, you know, for me, there was a couple of things about situations to avoid that might be kind of triggers for you. And again, it will depend on your viewpoint, but for me, socialising was a bit of a trigger at first. I'm the kind of person that I'm not very good at being kind of honest enough with people to say, no, I don't really feel like up for coming out today, or I can't come. So there was all this kind of flurry of birthdays and anniversaries and family events and children, things like baby showers and stuff, that I kind of found myself going to because I didn't really want to say, you know, no, I can't come, or I'm having a hard time at the moment, because I didn't feel I had an excuse. But actually, you don't need an excuse, and you know, it can be as simple as saying to people, look, you know, I just don't really want to talk about it at the moment, but I've just received some quite bad news, and I'm just not up for kind of going out at the moment. You know, I'll be in touch when I'm, you know, feeling a bit more positive. But it just, I'm sure most good friends will understand. You know, you don't have to tell them everything, but you could just tell them that, you know, it's not a really good time. Family events can be a bit of a trigger, because if you're upset about the infertility side of things, I mean, for me, what I'll probably talk about in another video, but one of the things that was really difficult is around the time of my diagnosis, I found out that 2 of my cousins were expecting babies with their partners, and it was one after the other, very news within a couple of weeks of each other, and it became a very difficult time for me, because it was all my family were talking about, it was all anybody wanted to talk about, and I just had this horrible news, and it felt like a bit of a cruel joke kind of thing that was happening. So I think, being with hindsight, I wish I'd have kind of avoided some situations, or just, you know, said to myself, okay, I don't think that's a good place for me to go at the moment. But you know, you will know what will be, you know, a trigger for you. But if there are social situations that you tend to find quite difficult when you're feeling low, just make things easy on yourself. You know, don't go to them. If you have to make an excuse, make an excuse. I mean, I'm not somebody that normally lies to get out of social engagements, but there was a couple of times when I just had to pretend I was feeling ill because I didn't want to go into it with people, and I just, you know, I couldn't do it. So if that's what you need to do, I'm sure, you know, you can be forgiven for a couple of white lies here and there if it gets you out of a tricky situation that you don't really want to be in. In terms of, one thing I'd say in terms of socialising, kind of depends again really whether this is something that affects you, but for me, I know that alcohol tends to amplify whatever mood I'm in. So where I try to avoid alcohol for a little while, just because I think it can make you feel much more hopeless and down than if you don't drink. So it may be an idea to try and avoid situations where you'll be kind of drinking a lot. because that can kind of not help things. You know, I think most of us know a time when we felt really awful about something, had loads to drink, and actually we just feel 100 times worse, and you've got a hangover as well. So that's probably something to think about. So I guess, you know, how I would finish up is saying, you know, because I realise we're nearly at an hour and I've gone on for way too long probably, but just remember you're on a journey. I've said it before, but I'll say it again, you know, you will feel different at different times, at different days, and that's okay. You know, you don't have to be consistent in your reaction, and you won't be, you know, you won't be able to control that. You will feel different at different times. But the period between when you very first kind of had that quite concrete. Hello again. I said I've been talking too long, and yeah, my computer cut me off because it reached 1 hour. So I am very sorry if you're incredibly bored by this point. Yeah, no, I was just saying, you know, it's okay to feel different on different times. You can't control that, and all you can do is take it one day at a time, one step at a time, and not be too hard on yourself in the process. So we'll talk about some other things next time. I haven't decided yet what might be a good topic, but what I would say is thank you so much to everybody that's been watching. I really do hope that these couple of videos so far have been helpful for you and have helped you, if nothing else, know that you're not alone in all this. Please do, I would be very interested to read any comments, and particularly any suggestions for any topics that you would like to see covered in this blog. I'm happy to do, you know, I may not be, as I say, an expert in anything, but if you have a topic that you really want me to discuss or you think would be helpful for people to hear about, then let me know, and I'll do what I can to do a post about that when I'm next available. I am going to try to do Sundays for this blog. Sundays tends to be quite a good day for me to do this type of thing, but please do bear with me if it's not on a. I don't really want to commit to it always being on a weekly basis because things do come up. So I'm also coming up to quite a busy time at work at the moment, so that there is a small chance you might have a bit of a wait for the next video. But I will be checking my comments, and I would be very happy to hear from anybody. So I think I've spoken enough at you. I hope you found it useful. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you again, and take care, have a lovely week, and chat to you soon. Thank you, bye.